For nearly 800 years, Muslims ruled parts of Spain. They built magnificent cities, libraries, palaces, and centers of knowledge that amazed the world. But today, almost all of it is gone. So what happened? In 711 CE, Muslim forces led by Tariq ibn Ziyad crossed from North Africa into the Iberian Peninsula. They landed at Jabal Tariq, later known as Gibraltar, named after Tariq himself. What began as a military expedition would soon transform the history of an entire continent. Within just a few years, Muslim armies defeated the Visigothic kingdom and rapidly expanded across most of Iberia. Major cities fell one after another, and Islamic rule spread from the southern coasts deep into the peninsula. The speed of the conquest stunned much of medieval Europe. The conquered lands became known as Al-Andalus, a Muslim civilization that would grow into one of the world's greatest centers of knowledge, architecture, trade, and culture. Its shining cities, especially Cordoba, became symbols of learning, wealth, and power in the medieval world. For centuries, Al-Andalus stood as one of the brightest civilizations on Earth. For centuries, Al-Andalus was not merely a kingdom. It was one of the brightest civilizations on Earth. While much of medieval Europe struggled through instability and decline, the cities of Muslim Spain glowed with light, learning, and innovation. At its height, Cordoba became one of the largest and most advanced cities in the world. The libraries of Al-Andalus contained hundreds of thousands of books at a time, when books elsewhere were rare and precious. Scholars traveled from distant lands to study mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, medicine, and language. Knowledge from the Muslim world, Greece, Persia, and beyond was translated, preserved, and expanded. Muslim scientists in Al-Andalus advanced astronomy, engineering, chemistry, and medicine. Doctors performed complex surgeries, wrote medical encyclopedias, and established organized hospitals centuries ahead of their time. The architecture of Al-Andalus reflected beauty, precision, and power. Mosques, palaces, gardens, and flowing fountains transformed cities into works of art. Even today, markets in Al-Andalus connected Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. Silk, spices, books, ceramics, and precious metals flowed through its cities. Poetry, music, calligraphy, and intellectual debate flourished across Al-Andalus. For generations, Al-Andalus stood as a symbol of confidence, sophistication, and human achievement. It was a civilization at its peak, and that is what made its fall so tragic. But no civilization remains at its peak forever. As the centuries passed, the strength of Al-Andalus slowly began to fracture, not in a single moment, but across generations. Shaped by political tension, rivalry, and division, the unity that once powered its rise became increasingly difficult to maintain. After the collapse of centralized Umayyad authority in Cordoba, Al-Andalus fractured into numerous smaller kingdoms known as the Taifa states. Many of these kingdoms remained wealthy and culturally advanced, but politically divided. Instead of acting as one united power, rulers increasingly competed against one another for influence, territory, and survival. Some rulers formed alliances against neighboring Muslim kingdoms. Others paid tribute to rising Christian powers in exchange for security. Court politics, succession disputes, and leadership struggles weakened stability. Military strength that could have defended the peninsula was consumed by internal competition. At the same time, the Christian kingdoms of northern Iberia were becoming more organized, militarily coordinated, and increasingly ambitious. While Al-Andalus remained intellectually brilliant, political fragmentation made collective defense far more difficult. Cities that once symbolized confidence and expansion slowly became isolated powers defending their own interests. This was not a sudden collapse caused by a single mistake. It was a long and gradual weakening of unity, strategy, and political cohesion. And perhaps that is what makes the story of Al-Andalus so tragic. A civilization that once illuminated the world with knowledge, beauty, and power gradually found itself divided from within, while external pressure continued to grow. The fall did not begin with destruction. It began with fragmentation. As Al-Andalus weakened internally, the balance of power in Iberia slowly began to shift. In the north, the Christian kingdoms were no longer small, isolated states struggling for survival. With each passing generation, they grew stronger, wealthier, and more coordinated. And slowly, the reconquest began to accelerate. The decline of Al-Andalus did not happen all at once. Year after year, strategic cities and territories were lost. Border regions became unstable. Fortresses that had once protected Muslim lands began falling one after another. Each defeat weakened trade routes, military strength, and political confidence. The Christian kingdoms of Castile, Aragon, and Leon increasingly coordinated military campaigns. At the same time, Christian rulers strengthened themselves through political marriages, alliances, and increasingly unified military goals. Over the centuries, the frontier moved steadily south. The momentum had changed. Al-Andalus was no longer expanding. It was retreating. By the late 15th century, almost all of Al-Andalus had disappeared. Only one major Muslim kingdom remained, Granada. Surrounded by advancing Christian forces and weakened by years of political struggle, Granada stood as the final remnant of centuries of Muslim civilization in Iberia. And by then, many understood that the end was approaching. In 1492, after a long siege, the ruler of Granada, Muhammad XII, known in Spanish history as Boabdil, surrendered the city to Isabella I of Castile and Ferdinand II of Aragon. The banners of Muslim rule were lowered, and for the first time in nearly 8 centuries, Al-Andalus had come to an end. For generations, Muslims in Iberia had built cities, libraries, mosques, gardens, and centers of learning that inspired the world. Now, many families watched their world disappear before their eyes. The streets that once echoed with scholarship, trade, poetry, and prayer fell into silence and uncertainty. What had taken centuries to build was gone. The fall of Granada was more than a military defeat. It marked the end of Muslim political rule in Iberia, the closing chapter of one of history's most remarkable civilizations. For many Andalusian Muslims, the years that followed brought fear, displacement, forced conversions, exile, and loss. And so the story of Al-Andalus did not end with triumph. It ended with longing, with memory, and with heartbreak. The fall of Granada was not the end of suffering for the Muslims of Al-Andalus. In the years that followed, many Muslims were pressured, and in some cases forced, to convert to Christianity. Others faced persecution, surveillance, imprisonment, or exile from the very lands their families had lived in for centuries. Eventually, large numbers of Andalusian Muslims were expelled entirely from Iberia. Mosques were transformed. Arabic gradually disappeared from public life, and much of the Islamic heritage of Al-Andalus was lost, altered, or slowly forgotten. Yet even after its fall, traces of that civilization still remained, in architecture, in language, in science, and in memory. The political power of Al-Andalus had ended, but its legacy never fully disappeared. The story of Al-Andalus is not only a story of conquest and loss, it is the story of a civilization that rose through ambition, knowledge, unity, and vision, and later struggled against division, instability, and the gradual erosion of political strength. For centuries, it illuminated the world with scholarship, architecture, science, and culture. And for centuries, many believed its greatness would last forever. But history rarely collapses in a single moment. Long before the final surrender of Granada, the fractures had already begun within. Civilizations often decline slowly, through rivalry, fragmentation, short-term thinking, and the loss of shared purpose. And perhaps that is why the story of Al-Andalus still resonates today, not simply because it fell, but because of how magnificent it once was.